The CEO thought she was after his money until he found out she was the mother of his child. Have you ever kept a secret so big it could destroy everything you love? She was once the most promising name in Seoul's elite. Now, she hides in the shadows, raising a child alone, a child whose father is the man who broke her heart and became the most powerful CEO in the country. What happens when their worlds collide again, years later, and the truth refuses to stay hidden? Because some love stories don't end in goodbye. They begin with silence and a child who calls the wrong man daddy. After the funeral, silence fell over the Ha estate like dust over forgotten ruins. Haun stood alone in the family courtyard where cherry blossoms once bloomed with pride. Now, weeds grew through the cracks of what used to be a legacy. Her father's death wasn't just the end of a life. It was the collapse of everything she ever knew. One by one, investors vanished, debts surfaced, and so did the whispers. And when the vultures came for the house, no one stood beside her. She left with a single suitcase, her name erased from elite social circles overnight. Haun had been Seoul's darling, a law prodigy raised in luxury. But as fast as she rose, the world turned colder. With her mother long gone and relatives denying her existence, she moved into a one-room flat near the train station. She stopped looking people in the eyes, especially when they recognized her. Humiliation had a taste, and she swallowed it every day. Weeks later, she stood in front of a pregnancy test with trembling fingers. 2 lines. Positive. The room spun. The memory of one last night with Minjun Lee, her ex-husband, haunted her. She hadn't told him about the divorce papers she signed in secret or about the baby that now grew inside her. Pride and pain clashed in her chest. The man who once held her heart now stood at the top of the corporate ladder while she counted coins for rice. Minjun was no longer the quiet law student she married. He was a CEO now, sharp, feared, and always in the news. Rumors swirled about his cold heart, his rejection of love, and a scandal involving a gold digger who tried to trap him with a fake pregnancy. Haun never reached out. How could she? She couldn't let her child be another pawn in his power struggle. So she vanished from his life, from the city, from the headlines. Years passed. Haun raised So-yeon with gentleness and grit. Her daughter's laughter filled rooms that knew hunger. She stitched secondhand clothes and taught So-yeon to read before the age of 4. And when the girl asked about her father, Haun smiled and said, "He's a star, too far to touch, but always watching." She buried her truth deep, convinced she was protecting them both from a world that judged too harshly. Yet in quiet moments, guilt whispered, was it right to keep Minjun in the dark? Would he have cared? She remembered his eyes, once full of love, then suspicion. Their divorce had been messy, driven by misunderstandings and pressure from his controlling mother. And Haun, ashamed of her family's fall, never explained. She simply disappeared from his world. But the past doesn't stay buried, especially not when it has eyes like his. So-yeon, now 6, had Minjun's quiet gaze and stubborn mouth. Strangers noticed the resemblance and asked questions Haun dodged like bullets. Some days, she wondered if it was time to tell the truth. Other days, she clutched her daughter's tiny backpack and prayed no one would connect the dots. Seoul was big enough for secrets, right? At least, that's what she told herself. Haun took freelance paralegal jobs, ghostwriting arguments for junior attorneys who didn't even know her name. Her pride, once sharp as glass, had dulled. She stopped reading newspapers, especially the ones with Minjun's face on the cover, celebrating corporate victories, hosting gala events. Love triangle scandals filled the gossip columns, but never with her name. She was a ghost, and ghosts don't get redemption arcs. Sometimes she stood outside his skyscraper just to remember what ambition felt like. She'd squint up, imagining what he was doing in that corner office. Did he ever think of her? Did he hate her? Or worse, did he forget? Once she almost walked in, but her reflection in the glass, tired, poor, forgotten, stopped her. She turned around, gripping So-Yun's hand tighter. One rainy night, So-Yun fell ill. High fever, pale lips, and a tiny body curled in bed. Haun sat beside her, whispering lullabies through tears. In that moment, she realized the limits of love without power. Money could have bought faster care, better doctors, warmer blankets. But all she had were old remedies and prayers. That night, something cracked in her. Not her love, but her silence. In the days that followed, Haun made a decision. She would return to the world she left behind. Not for herself, but for So-Yun. She updated her resume, hiding gaps with clever wording. She packed away shame and unfolded courage. The past had one last grip on her, but motherhood gave her the strength to fight back. Still, she had no idea what waited for her in the shadows of that decision. Because Minjun wasn't just her ex-husband anymore. He was a king in a tower built on loyalty and revenge. And kings don't like surprises, especially the kind that look just like them. The banquet hall shimmered with golden chandeliers and whispered envy. It was the annual reunion of Seoul's top law alumni, a night of suits, secrets, and carefully curated smiles. Haun hadn't planned on going, but when her old professor called personally, reminding her of her brilliance, something in her stirred. She borrowed a dress, retouched old heels, and promised herself she'd just blend into the crowd. But fate never honors quiet intentions. As she stepped through the grand doors, heads turned, not out of admiration, but recognition laced with disbelief. Haun, once the pride of their class, now walked in alone, wearing a dated gown and a brave face. Her name traveled fast through champagne glasses. "Isn't it the girl who married poor and vanished?" one whispered. "I heard she left him the moment he got rich," another sneered. And so the night's entertainment began. The sharpest cut came from Ji-woo, her former friend turned rumor mill queen. "Still chasing gold, Haun? Or did you finally find someone to sponsor those shoes?" The laughter around them echoed like glass breaking. Haun stood still, spine straight, smile tight. She wouldn't let them see her crack. But the burn inside her chest was real. She clutched her clutch tighter. Inside, a photo of So-Yun was folded like armor. That's when she saw him. Minjun, tall, immaculate, and colder than winter's breath. He stood at the far end of the room, surrounded by board members and socialites. His gaze swept the crowd like a lighthouse, indifferent, until it landed on her. And paused. Their eyes locked. Years dissolved in a heartbeat. The room fell away. But then he blinked, and the chill returned. He walked toward her like he owned the floor. Because in a way he did. "Didn't expect you here," he said, his voice low and sharp as a knife's edge. "Guess charity invites are easier to come by these days." His words weren't loud, but they sliced just right for the people around them to smirk. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a check. "Here, I assume this is why you came back. How much to kneel?" The hall fell silent. A collective gasp. Cameras blinked. Even Ji-woo stopped breathing. Haun stared at the check, then at him. Slowly, with grace carved from broken pride, she reached up and slapped the paper from his hand. "I didn't come here to beg," she said, voice calm, but her eyes brimmed with unshed storms. "And I'll never kneel to a man who forgot how to be won." Minjun didn't flinch, but his jaw clenched. For a moment, the CEO mask slipped, and beneath it, something wounded flickered. He leaned in closer, whispering so only she could hear. You disappeared. You left me with no answers, no closure. She stepped back. You had the whole world. You didn't need me. Their pain was real, but buried beneath pride and years of silence. People drifted away, sensing the tension. But Haun stood her ground, even when the event photographer nudged closer, hoping for scandal. She turned, walking toward the back patio, where the air was colder and less judgmental. There, alone under fairy lights, she allowed one tear to fall. Just one. For the girl she used to be. For the love that once promised forever. Inside, Minjun watched her leave. He pocketed the check, but something else stayed with him. Her eyes. Not desperate, not guilty, just tired and sad. He remembered how they used to laugh in the campus library, how she would tuck her hair behind her ear when nervous. That woman still existed beneath the quiet fire. But now there was something else in her, something maternal. He walked to the bar, ignoring questions and sidelong glances. Ordered whiskey neat. She still hates me, he muttered. His assistant raised an eyebrow. Maybe not hate. Maybe something worse, regret. Across the room, Jiwoo whispered to another guest. Can you believe she still acts like she's better than us? But even jealousy knew when it had lost its bite. Back in her small apartment, Haun tucked So-yeon into bed. The little girl stirred, whispering, Mommy, did you see stars tonight? Haun brushed hair from her daughter's forehead. I saw a ghost, she replied, more to herself. And in that moment, she realized the past wasn't as buried as she hoped. It had a pulse, and it had just looked her in the eye. What Haun didn't know was that Minjun had already asked his assistant one quiet favor before leaving the banquet. Find out where she works now, because curiosity isn't always about vengeance. Sometimes it's the first step toward a story begging to be reopened. The morning was gray, the kind that made the city feel even colder than usual. Haun stood outside the towering glass building, resume in hand, heart racing. The name engraved on the entrance read L&M Legal Group, one of the most powerful law firms in all of Seoul. She hadn't expected a call back. Her application had been a desperate shot in the dark, sent at 2 a.m. between tears and tea. Now, here she was, shaking in borrowed heels. The elevator ride felt endless. Haun rehearsed her answers, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her blouse. She didn't notice the receptionist's widened eyes when she gave her name. Room 49, top floor, the woman said, a hint of surprise in her voice. Haun nodded, unaware of what that form meant. Executive interviews didn't happen up there, unless someone very specific requested it. When the doors opened, she stepped into a space that screamed power. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and silence thick enough to cut. A secretary guided her in, and then there he was, Minjun Lee, in a tailored charcoal suit, leaning casually behind a massive desk, eyes unreadable. For a moment, she froze. This couldn't be real. Was this some cruel setup? He didn't speak right away, just stared, letting the weight of the moment settle like dust on old memories. Finally, he gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. She obeyed, spine stiff, clutching her resume like a shield. So, he said, flipping through her papers, you're applying to be our corporate litigation consultant? His tone was unreadable. She nodded. I didn't know you worked here. Minjun smirked. I don't. I own it. The air shifted. Haun's breath caught. Of course he did. The ex-husband she once knew had become a legal titan. Why didn't you tell me at the reunion? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged. I wanted to see how long you'd pretend we were strangers. Then, without warning, he stamped her file. Hired. Wait, what? She blinked. Just like that. He leaned forward. Full benefits. Double the standard salary. Executive perks. Haun's jaw tightened. It didn't make sense. No interview questions. No portfolio review. What's the catch? She asked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Let's just say, I'm curious how you'll perform under pressure. The job offer is too good, too fast, and far too personal. Haun left the office in a daze, the contract in her hands heavy with questions. It felt like walking into a trap. But behind the fear was something more urgent. So-yeon needed better. Better food, better care, better chances. And this job? It could be their lifeline. That night, Haun stared at the sleeping form of her daughter. I'll protect you, she whispered, even if it means working under the man who broke me. Her pride warred with practicality, but motherhood won. She signed the contract the next morning and walked into her new office, one floor below Minjun's, close enough to feel him watching. From day one, strange things happened. Her desk was upgraded. Gourmet meals arrived at lunch. Co-workers whispered when she passed, some with pity, others with envy. Must be nice to be the boss's favorite, one muttered. Probably another gold digger trying to climb back into his life, another scoffed. Haun said nothing. She just worked, harder than everyone else. Minjun barely spoke to her directly, but his presence lingered. He'd pass by during meetings, linger in doorways, ask for updates no one else had to give. She kept her answers brief, her walls up, but inside, she was unraveling. Was this revenge? Pity? Or something she couldn't name? Each glance between them carried weight of memory, regret, and something unspoken. On her second Friday, she found a sticky note on her desk. No name, just a message. Your past doesn't define your value here. Her hands trembled as she read it. She didn't need to ask who wrote it. That handwriting was once etched in love letters and birthday cards. The man she once knew still existed, or at least fragments of him did. But deep down, Haun knew better than to trust fragments, especially when secrets still lingered, and one in particular had tiny hands and a matching smile. And while she tried to hide that part of her life, fate had other plans, ones that were about to step through the doors of that office very, very soon. The office had a rhythm, brisk footsteps, hushed phone calls, keyboard clicks. But ever since Haun arrived, that rhythm shifted. Conversations paused when she entered a room. People looked too long, then pretended not to. And behind every polite smile was a question hanging in the air. Why her? She ignored it mostly, but whispers have a way of sneaking into the soul, no matter how thick your skin. They called her lucky. Some said she must have known someone high up. Others whispered the word gold digger as if it were perfume she wore. Her name became a currency for gossip. Minjun never treated anyone like this before, one said. Lunch delivered from 5-star chefs? Reserved parking? Who is she, really? They all had theories. None of them were close to the truth. Minjun, of course, remained distant. Professional, except for the small things, like remembering how she took her tea, or leaving signed approvals before she even submitted requests. He didn't smile. He didn't joke. But he noticed, and that alone made the office buzz with curiosity, especially for those who'd never seen him look at someone with softness. Then came the day everything cracked open. So-yeon had caught a fever again. Haun had no choice. With no sitter, no options, she brought her daughter to the office, swaddled in blankets, cheeks flushed. She'll stay in the corner, she promised her supervisor. She won't disturb anyone. But fate doesn't do quiet, not when it has something to say. The moment Minjun walked in, time slowed. So-yeon, curled on a couch with a book, looked up. Their eyes met. And just like that, a breath escaped her lips. Daddy. The room froze. Papers stopped rustling. Haun stood, heart in her throat. She whispered, "So-yun, no," but the damage was done. Min-jun stood frozen, staring at the little girl like he'd seen a ghost. He knelt down slowly. "What did you say?" So-yun tilted her head, innocent and honest. "You look like my drawings." She reached into her backpack, pulling out a crayon sketch, a tall man with a suit and soft eyes. "Mommy said my daddy's far away, but you're here now." Min-jun took the paper with trembling fingers. His face, usually carved in stone, cracked. After that, the building buzzed louder than ever. Employees speculated everything from secret affairs to hidden pasts. Someone said they saw a paternity test order land on Min-jun's desk. Others claimed he was planning to fire her. But what actually happened was stranger than fiction. He sent flowers to Ha-eun's desk. White lilies, the same kind she carried on their wedding day. Ha-eun confronted him that night in the parking garage. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice breaking. You know what she said was a mistake. Min-jun didn't answer right away. "She looks like me," he finally said. "Talks like me. Laughs like we used to." His eyes searched hers. "How long were you going to keep her from me?" Her silence was an answer he couldn't bear. Days passed, but the atmosphere never calmed. Co-workers avoided her now, unsure whether she was a ticking bomb or the CEO's secret. Her office felt smaller, colder. But So-yun's smile at the end of each day made it worth it. That little girl, unaware of the storm she stirred, asked the simplest question on the walk home. "Do you think he likes my drawing?" Ha-eun didn't know what to say. Love triangle rumors had already begun online. Photos from the reunion banquet leaked, showing Min-jun and Ha-eun mid-stare. Someone even speculated she was after his inheritance, planting a secret child for revenge. But Ha-eun knew the truth. She wasn't hunting power. She was surviving it, and now was pushing back. At night, she watched Min-jun from her window. His penthouse glowed across the city like a star she couldn't reach. Yet his shadow appeared more and more in her life. Emails signed him. Voice messages asking about So-yun's health. He was breaking his own silence, brick by careful brick. But what would happen when the final truth shattered the wall between them? Because in that truth was a child, a memory, and a question Min-jun hadn't dared ask aloud yet. One that would turn everything upside down. Is she really mine? The envelope sat on Min-jun's desk like a loaded weapon. Silent, slim, and explosive. For 3 nights, he hadn't opened it. He didn't need to. The resemblance was undeniable, haunting him in every corner of his office and mind. But logic demanded proof. And proof came sealed with his name on it, from the most expensive lab in South Korea. He poured himself a drink and finally broke the seal. Positive. 99.9%. So-yun was his daughter, a secret child he never knew he had. The whiskey burned down his throat, but it didn't numb the storm inside him. His hands trembled, something they hadn't done in years. Betrayal, regret, and a sudden, overwhelming ache. How many birthdays had he missed? How many fevers? Laughs? Drawings? The thought tore through him like glass. He slammed the glass onto the desk, shards of emotion scattering across the marble. How could she keep this from him? The woman he once loved more than his own ambition. Ha-eun had lied. No, she had erased him, rewritten a future where he was nothing but a ghost to his own blood. And yet, his heart didn't feel hate. It felt hollow. The next morning, Ha-eun found him waiting in the break room, something he'd never done before. No assistants, no barriers, just him, eyes darker than usual. "We need to talk," he said. She nodded, knowing exactly why. In his office, he tossed the test onto the table. Explain. No greeting, no mercy, just pain wrapped in command. Ha-eun closed the door and stood still. "I wasn't hiding her to hurt you." He scoffed. Then what was it? Protection? Pride? Her voice shook. Both. She stepped closer, but kept a distance. You were rising. Your family hated mine. I didn't want you dragged down by our disgrace. He laughed bitterly. So you erased me from her life instead? She was a baby, Minjun, Haun cried. I had no money, no home. I couldn't fight your mother. I couldn't fight anyone. I survived. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. Do you know how cruel it is to learn I have a daughter from a lab report? She nodded. Eyes full of tears she refused to let fall. I know. I've cried every night for years wondering if I made the right choice. A long silence followed. Then softly Minjun asked, does she know? Aeun hesitated. Not really. She thinks you're far away. Like a star. He sat down, eyes tired. And now, she's starting to wonder. She sees your photo online. She asked me why you're not with us. The word us hit him like a train. There was in U.S., and he wasn't part of it. Later that day, his assistant overheard him canceling meetings. Tell them I have family matters, he said, a phrase no one had ever heard him use. Meanwhile, Haun tried to continue working, but every word blurred on the screen. Her body stayed in the office, but her mind kept racing. Would he take Soyeon away? Would he use the courts, the money, the power? When she got home that night, Soyeon sat on the floor drawing a family. A mother, a child, and a man with a suit and smile. Is this Daddy? She asked. Hao nodded, unable to lie anymore. He's someone very special. The girl grinned. I knew it. Her innocence made the fear sharper. What if that little smile became a courtroom battle? Minjun, meanwhile, stared at the same drawing in his office. She'd left it behind by mistake. He traced the crayon lines, heart aching. He could destroy her, legally, socially, financially. But instead, he whispered, she called me Daddy. That one word had cracked open something buried. Not revenge, not control, something scarier, hope. The next morning, he knocked on her office door, something no one had ever seen him do. Let's make a deal, he said. No lawyers, no threats, just time. She blinked. Time for what? He looked down. To get to know her, and maybe to remember who we were before all of this. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. What neither of them knew was that someone in the company had already leaked the DNA results. And outside those glass walls, tabloids were preparing a headline that would throw both their lives into chaos. The call came just after sunrise. Minjun's grandmother, Madame Lee, fierce, traditional, and unaware of the divorce, was arriving from Busan for her 80th birthday. Her health was fragile, and doctors had warned against any shocks or emotional upheaval. To her, Minjun was still a happily married man, and Haun was the jewel of the family. The lie had lingered for years, protected by distance. But now distance was gone. Minjun stood at Haun's doorway that same morning, hair unkempt, eyes pleading. I need a favor, he said. She crossed her arms. A favor from the woman you accused of betrayal? He sighed. She doesn't know we divorced. And I can't risk telling her now. Her heart's too weak. Haun's eyes narrowed. So you want me to lie? He nodded gently. Just for a few days. Pretend we're still married. The silence between them was thick. What about Soyeon? She asked. She already thinks we're something. Minjun hesitated. Then maybe this will make her happy. And Grandma, too. We'll share the house. Fake smiles. Separate beds. Nothing more. Haun looked at him, wounded but curious. You really think we can fake love again? He gave a half smile. We were always good at pretending, weren't we? By evening, their things were packed. Soyeon danced through the apartment, delighted. We're going to live together? She squealed. Like a real family? Haun forced a smile. Just for Grandma's visit, baby. But the little girl didn't hear the condition. She only saw her dream unfolding. That night, they moved into Minjun's luxurious penthouse, a palace compared to their cramped apartment. The first awkward moment came at the front door. The doorman greeted them like royalty, assuming Hoon had always belonged there. In the elevator, So-Yun clung to Minjun's hand, chattering about princess rooms and bedtime stories. Hoon stood silently, watching a life she once had, now returned like a ghost wrapped in gold. Inside the penthouse, Madame Li was already seated in her velvet chair, wrapped in shawls and pearls. When she saw Hoon, her face lit up. "My beautiful granddaughter," she whispered, arms open. Still the light in Minjun's eyes. The guilt hit hard, but Hoon embraced her, holding back the truth. "Happy birthday, Halmoni," she said softly. "We missed you." Dinner that night was a strange theater. Madame Li beamed as she watched them eat. Minjun passed Hoon water. She laughed at his jokes. So-Yun bounced between them like glue. The Lai sat at the table too, dressed in politeness and nostalgia. But the weight of it crept into every gesture. When Madame Li retired to her room, Minjun whispered, "Thanks. You were incredible. I unschragd. I'm used to surviving." Then came the question neither wanted to ask: sleeping arrangements. "You can take the master," he offered. "I'll sleep in the guest room." But So-Yun tugged his sleeve. "Can we all sleep together? Just like families do in cartoons." Her eyes sparkled. Neither of them had the heart to say no. So they did the unthinkable, shared one room, one bed, with pillows stacked in the middle like the 38th parallel. At night, Hoon lay stiffly on one side, Minjun on the other. Between them, a small mountain of barriers and a child snoring softly. She stared at the ceiling. "This is insane," she whispered. He chuckled, voice low. "Maybe, but it's the first time I've felt peace in years." Her heart clenched, not from romance, from mourning. They could have had this years ago if pride hadn't built walls higher than love could climb. One night became 2, then 3. They began cooking breakfast together, awkward but warm. They took So-Yun to school hand in hand. Neighbors smiled, unaware of the lie. Hoon laughed more. Minjun watched her when she wasn't looking. And yet, every moment of comfort came wrapped in fear. Because when Madame Li left, so would this fragile illusion. And neither of them dared ask the question growing louder by the day. What if pretending stops feeling like a lie? The gala was held at the top floor of Seoul's most exclusive hotel, a swirling sea of power suits, designer gowns, and corporate masks. It wasn't just any event. Tonight, L&M Legal Group would unveil its new chief legal counsel. Rumors flew like confetti. Some said it was a foreign candidate. Others guessed it would be someone handpicked by Minjun himself. No one expected Hoon, not even her. She arrived late, arm in arm with Minjun, as Madame Li had insisted. "Arrive together, leave together," the old woman said with a wink. Cameras flashed. People whispered. And Shunlin, a sharp-tongued executive and Hoon's longtime rival, narrowed her eyes. "Still playing house, I see," she muttered. Jealousy dripped from her voice like poison. Hoon walked with grace, ignoring the stares. But inside, she was unraveling. She hadn't been to an event like this since before her fall. Back when her name meant something. Back when people bowed. Now, she walked among sharks, some eager to devour her past, others to expose her present. And Shunlin was the hungriest of them all. During the dinner toast, Shunlin rose, glass in hand. "To L&M's future," she said sweetly. Then, with a smile too sharp, she added, "And to those who know how to climb the ladder, even if it's through bed sheets." Gasps rippled across the room. All eyes turned to Hoon. Her fort paused midair. So-yun, watching from the side with a babysitter, frowned. Min-jun's jaw tightened, but Haun stood calmly. "Is that your attempt at wit?" she asked. Shen-lin smirked. "Just calling things as they are. Some of us earned our way here. Others married well, or divorced better." The insult was surgical. Haun's hands trembled under the table. Min-jun began to rise, but she placed a hand on his wrist. "Let me." She stood. The room hushed. Haun reached in her clutch and pulled out a small, black leather badge. Gold embossed with a single word, Stella. Gasps filled the hall. It was a name spoken in reverent tones across courtrooms. A legal phantom. No one knew her identity. Until now. "You're Stella," someone whispered. Shenlin's face drained of color. "Impossible," she muttered. "Stella doesn't exist." "Unsmied." "She does. And she's been writing your legal policies for years." She turned to the crowd. "While I raised my daughter alone, while I rebuilt my life without a title, I've stood in the shadows, earning every cent. I didn't climb through bed sheets. I built the damn stairs myself." The crowd erupted. Clients stood and applauded. Executives who once ignored her raised their glasses. Shen-lin sat frozen, her plan unraveling in real time. Madame Li beamed from the front row. "That's my granddaughter," she whispered, wiping away a tear. Min-jun stared at Haun like he was seeing her for the first time and falling all over again. Later, as they stood on the rooftop terrace under city lights, Haun leaned against the railing. "I didn't plan to reveal that tonight," she said. Min-jun handed her a glass of champagne. "Then I'm glad Shen-lin opened her mouth." They clinked glasses. "You stole the night." She looked at him. "I didn't do it for the night. I did it for every day I was called less than." He stepped closer. "I've always known you were more." His voice was soft, almost breaking. She smiled sadly. "You just forgot for a while." Between them, the air hummed with the energy of old promises and new beginnings. But beneath it all, both knew the storm wasn't over. Power brings enemies, and some, like Shen-lin, never leave quietly. And in a locked office downstairs, Shen-lin deleted files and prepared her own counterattack, one that would target not just Haun's reputation, but something far more fragile, So-yun. It began with a missing file. Just one. A confidential client document that vanished from the firm's database overnight. IT panicked. Legal scrambled. The board demanded answers. And somehow, impossibly, the security logs traced the breach back to an IP address linked to Haun's work terminal. Within hours, whispers began again. This time, more dangerous than ever. Shen-lin made her move swiftly. "We have protocols," she told the executives. "No one is above the law. Not even the CEO's little project." Her words were sharp, wrapped in fake concern. Min-jun didn't respond right away. He stared at the file, jaw clenched, heart caught between doubt and rage. Haun's badge had been used, but something fell off. Too clean, too obvious. Haun was summoned to the boardroom. She walked in with her head high, despite the knot in her stomach. "You accessed the file after hours," Shen-lin said, pointing to the screen. "Explain." Haun looked at the data, then at Min-jun. "I didn't do this." Her voice didn't waver. "I was home, with my daughter." But the evidence, forged to perfection, said otherwise. That morning, So-yun had come to visit the office with a coloring book in hand. Madame Li had insisted she come to celebrate her brilliant mother. The little girl skipped into the meeting room and froze. She saw her mother cornered, faces stern, voices sharp. Something in her tiny chest sparked. She dropped her crayons and marched straight to the head of the table. "She didn't do it." So-yun cried. "Mommy's not a thief." The room blinked in stunned silence. Shen-lin sighed. "This isn't the place, child." But So-Yun pointed at the screen. That's not Mommy's password. I saw her type it. It ends with my birthday, not those numbers. A murmur spread. Haon looked at her daughter in shock. How did you? I watch you, So-Yun said simply. Every time you work. One of the junior techs perked up. Wait, if that's true, then the login string was faked. He rushed out of the room. Minjun stood slowly. Let her speak, he ordered, voice deadly calm. So-Yun puffed her chest. Mommy types fast. The person who used that computer types slow. I saw the log once when I was drawing beside her. Within 30 minutes, the tech team returned with new evidence. The breach had been routed through a hidden admin profile, created the day Shunlin took over security oversight. It wasn't just sabotage. It was personal, and it had failed. Minjun turned to Shunlin. You framed her. Shunlin paled. I was protecting the firm. His voice dropped to ice. You're fired. Haon didn't gloat. She didn't even speak. She knelt beside her daughter and hugged her tightly. You were amazing, she whispered. You saved Mommy. So-Yun beamed. I just told the truth. Madam Lee, who had arrived quietly, wiped a tear from her cheek. That girl has more courage than half the adults in this room. Later, Minjun sat beside Haon in her office. I should have trusted you, he said quietly. I've been so focused on the past, I forgot who you are now. She shook her head. You doubted me, even after everything. He didn't argue. I'll earn back that trust. One moment at a time. Outside the door, So-Yun peeked through the window, drawing them in her notebook, side by side, with hearts around them. But even as the truth cleared the air, shadows remained. Shunlin was gone, but her connections weren't. And not everyone forgives a strong woman who refuses to kneel, especially one who's loved by the man they couldn't control. Because the higher Haon rose, the more enemies waited in silence, watching, plotting, and ready to strike again when she least expected it. The office felt quieter after the storm. Shunlin's departure had left a noticeable void, not just in operations, but in tension. People spoke softer. Smiles lasted longer. But for Minjun and Haon, peace didn't mean clarity. It meant space. And in that space, the past echoed louder than ever. The questions they hadn't asked, the truths they hadn't faced, the love they hadn't buried, no matter how hard they tried. One evening, as the city lights blinked on like fireflies, Minjun appeared at Haon's office door. He didn't knock, just stood there, tie loosened, eyes tired. Can we talk? She looked up, surprised. About the case? He stepped in. No, about us. She exhaled slowly, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. It's been a long time coming, hasn't it? He sat, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Why didn't you tell me the truth back then? About your family's bankruptcy. About everything. Haon's eyes dropped. Because I was ashamed. Because I thought loving you meant protecting you, even from me. She laughed bitterly. Turns out, I was just running. He nodded. And I let you. I left without saying goodbye, she whispered. I didn't want to see the disappointment in your eyes. Minjun leaned back. I wasn't disappointed in you. I was heartbroken. I thought you chose pride over us. Her eyes filled. I didn't choose pride. I chose survival. I had nothing to offer you but chaos. He stood, pacing. You were never chaos. You were home. They sat in silence, the weight of missed years pressing on their shoulders. So-Yun changed everything, he finally said. She made me realize how much life I missed. Atin wipat atea. She looks like you when she's serious. But she has your laugh. He smiled. Then I'm lucky. I get to see myself through her, and maybe through you again. The next weekend, they took So-Yun to the zoo. No bodyguards. No photographers. Just a girl between two people trying to remember how to be a family. They fed giraffes, bought cotton candy, took silly photos. For the first time in years, laughter came easily. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and real was enough. That night, Haun cooked dinner in Minjun's kitchen. He offered to help, but mostly just watched, fascinated by her ease, her rhythm. You used to burn ramen, she teased. Still do, he admitted. That's why I need you here. The words hung in the air longer than he meant. She didn't respond, just set the plates down with a soft smile. After So-Yun fell asleep, they shared a bottle of wine on the balcony. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we never broke up? She asked. Minjun nodded. All the time, but then I think, maybe we had a break to understand how much we mattered. She tilted her head. You really believe that? I do, he said. Pain rewrites us. But maybe now we get to choose the ending. The following day, Minjun took them shopping. Not at designer stores or showrooms, but local markets. They bought matching sneakers, a worn-out teddy bear, and a cheap but beautiful necklace So-Yun insisted Haun wear. It's magic, she said. It brings hearts back together. Haun looked at Minjun. She's a romantic. She gets it from me, he joked. That night, Haun found an old photo tucked into a book in the penthouse, their wedding picture. Young, hopeful, unaware of the storms ahead. She held it for a long time, then placed it beside So-Yun's drawing on the fridge. A past and a present, side by side. She didn't know what the future held. But maybe, just maybe, the broken pieces could become something beautiful again. But love, like healing, is never linear. And as they grew closer, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Just 4 words that chilled her blood. He still doesn't know. The envelope sat unopened for days, buried under grocery lists and school flyers. But Haun couldn't ignore it forever. He still doesn't know. For words, no signature, no explanation, but every letter felt like a threat. Late at night, she sat on the couch, turning the message over in her hands. What didn't he know? And who else was watching their lives so closely? She thought about hiding it, about pretending it never came. But secrets had already cost her too much. And Minjun, the man who once doubted her, then fought to stand beside her, deserved more than silence. So she walked into his office the next morning, closed the door behind her, and placed the envelope on his desk. This came, she said quietly. I don't know what it means, but I want you to. He read it, then looked at her. Are you hiding something else from me? She shook her head. Not anymore. He nodded slowly, then burned the note in a silver ashtray. Then we don't look back. But even as the ashes curled, the warning lingered. They didn't speak of it again. Instead, they chose to move forward, one step, one day, one truth at a time. A week later, the office buzzed with celebration. Haun had just been named Employee of the Quarter, an internal honor, but one that meant more than any courtroom victory. Her colleagues applauded. Flowers arrived from clients. Even the partners, once distant, now praised her leadership. But the moment that stole the air from a room came when Minjun walked in holding a small velvet box. He didn't speak, just crossed the room with steady steps. And then, in front of everyone, he knelt. Gasps rippled. Phones clicked. But all Haun saw was his face, open, vulnerable, raw. We've survived scandal, shame, silence, and pride, he said. But through it all, I never stopped loving you. Will you marry me again? Not for Grandma, not for the company, for us. Tears welled in her eyes. Around them, the office disappeared. It was just 2 hearts standing in the ruins of their past, daring to believe in something new. Yes, she whispered, but only if we promise to stop hiding. From each other, from ourselves. He stood, slipped a ring on her finger, and kissed her forehead. Deal! Later that night, they returned home as a family. Madam Lee greeted them with red envelopes and happy tears. I knew you two just needed time, she beamed. So-Yun danced in circles. Does this mean we're getting married again? With cake. Aeun laughed. With cake, flowers, and everything in between. The little girl squealed, arms around both of them. In the final days before the wedding, old wounds slowly became soft stories. Haon visited her father's grave and whispered, I'm not ashamed anymore. Minjun rewrote his will, this time including So-Yun's name. And together, they signed documents not with regret, but with hope. A single mother, a secret child, and an ex-husband finally learning what forgiveness truly meant. The wedding was simple, just family, a few friends, and a quiet garden in the heart of Seoul. No headlines, no cameras, just vows spoken with trembling voices, hands held tighter than ever. Adim burasuf tivoidras. So-Yun dropped flower petals down the aisle, and Minjun cried, not out of weakness, but relief. After the ceremony, they sat on a bench, the three of them watching lanterns float into the night sky. Do you think we're really starting over? Haon asked. Minjun smiled. Not starting over. Starting right. She leaned into him. So-Yun climbed onto their laps. The stars above seemed to nod in approval. But deep in the city, in a dark office, someone watched the news of their reunion with narrowed eyes. The next chapter hadn't even begun, and already someone was preparing to rewrite it. Not every love story is perfect. Some begin with pride, fall apart in silence, and only find their way back through pain, forgiveness, and a little girl brave enough to speak the truth. Haon thought she was protecting her daughter by hiding the past. Minjun thought he'd buried the love he lost. But destiny, and a child's innocent heart, rewrote their ending. Now tell me, what would you have done in Haon's place? Would you forgive a love that shattered you? Would you risk it all to start again? Speech balloons, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your heart. And if you enjoy stories like this, full of love, redemption, and second chances, Sparkle, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. There's so much more coming your way.